At 7:42 in the pale chill of March 14th, 1941, Beatrice Tilly Shilling stood beside the runway at RAF Kenley, the morning fog curling around her boots, while another young pilot clambered into his Hurricane for what might well have been his last flight. She was 32, small, sharp-eyed, 6 years deep at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, and still without a fix for the flaw that was killing her boys in the sky. That week alone, the Luftwaffe had hurled 43 Messerschmitt Bf-109s across the Channel, and the Man of Fighter Command had met them in 27 savage dances of fire and steel. 14 Hurricanes lost, 9 Spitfires gone, the pattern cruelly familiar, an enemy sighted, a British dive begun, the Merlin's song strangled mid-plunge, the engine coughing dead as the German pulled away or wheeled back to finish the job. Shilling had read the combat reports till her eyes blurred, pored over maintenance logs soaked in oil and grief, and sat with the men who'd lived long enough to describe that awful silence when the carburetor flooded and the prop froze. Simple physics, fatal consequence. During a sudden nose-down push, fuel rushed the wrong way inside the float chamber, smothering the jet. 1.5 seconds of starvation, long enough for a Messerschmitt to close 300 yards and spit death. The Germans, blessed were cursed, with the Daimler-Benz engine's fuel injection, never lost power, not for a heartbeat. They could dive, climb, roll, invert at will. That edge was bleeding the RAF faster than the training schools could refill the ranks. For 11 months, she'd wrestled the problem, while the men at Rolls-Royce sketched an elegant answer, a full-pressure carburetor. But that miracle wouldn't roll out till 43 or later, and the war was swallowing pilots now. So that gray morning, she waited with something small and secret in her leather satchel. A brass ring, no wider than a coin, machined with monastic precision. If the numbers she'd run were right, it could keep the Merlin breathing under -G. If they were wrong, it might cost a man his life, and her career besides. By noon, she'd know which. The trouble had started back in July 40, when the RAF switched to 100-octane fuel. More octane meant more boost, and the supercharged Merlins now kicked 1,300 horses instead of 11, shoving Spitfire Mark IIs to 370 in level flight, fast enough to chase the 109s. But the Skinner's Union carburetor wasn't built for such abuse. At Farnborough, Shilling was Principal Technical Officer for Carburetor Development, the only woman doing such work, and half the men there figured she ought to be typing memos, not rewriting airflow equations. She didn't waste breath arguing. Engines spoke the only language she cared for. Since she was 14, she'd been tearing down Nortons and Triumphs, rebuilding them by touch till they ran smoother than the factory's own. At 25, she'd raced that same Norton round Brooklands at 106 average, earning the Gold Star and the respect of men who swore no woman could handle speed. Now she was trying to give British fighters that same fearless throttle. The idea had struck her one bitter January night. If fuel surged too freely when gravity flipped, then choke it slightly, just enough to keep the mixture lean and steady. A thin brass washer with a pinhole center could limit the rush without starving the beast. 17 prototypes later, she'd found the sweet spot, a hole barely 40,000ths of an inch wide. On the bench rig, it worked perfectly, but bench runs weren't combat. At 300 miles an hour, math alone didn't save lives. Permission to test was impossible. Regulations stacked against her like sandbags. Install an unapproved part on an RAF fighter, and you invited court-martial, maybe prison if a man died. She chose to gamble anyway. At Kenley that morning, she had 6 restrictors and one trusted accomplice, Sergeant William Cooper, an engine man who'd seen 19 pilots die for want of reliable fuel flow. When she showed him the washer, he just nodded and reached for his spanner. 20 minutes before takeoff, they slipped the brass piece between pump and carburetor, sealed it with a quick weld so neat no inspector would ever notice. Squadron Leader Davies, 24 years old, 41 combat sorties, 3 confirmed kills, would be the unwitting test pilot. Twice that month, his engine had cut out mid-dive. Twice luck and altitude had brought him home. He thought the woman on the tarmac was some clerk. She thought he was about to prove her right or bury her theory. The Merlin roared, brakes released. The hurricane clawed skyward, banking south toward the channel. Through binoculars, she tracked it climb into the pale sun, 2 wingmen sliding into formation behind. Dungeonies lay ahead, and German patrols loved its sky. If Davies met a fight, the washer would meet truth. She waited. 40 minutes crawled by. No word. Radio silence could mean anything, no contact, or chaos, or a funeral she hadn't heard yet. Then, at 9:37, the crackle. Control reporting 3 hurricanes inbound, 2 minutes out. Her pulse jumped. 3 dark specks appeared against the haze, all returning. Davies landed first, taxied in, engine purring steady as a hymn. She approached, hands trembling. He pulled off his helmet, grinning, an expression almost foreign on a fighter pilot's face those days. "Any trouble with the Merlin, sir?" Cooper asked. "Best she's ever run," Davies said. "Dove on 2 109s over the water, engine never missed a beat." For the first time in nearly a year, he'd pressed to dive without blackout or flameout. When she told him what she'd done, a washer, a restriction the thickness of a fingernail, he stared, then barked for Cooper to fit one in every hurricane on station before sundown. Authorization be damned. The Crown could court-martial him after the war. Right now, he meant to keep his boys alive. That afternoon, Cooper installed 4 more, and within 3 days, 5 modified hurricanes had flown combat patrols, 12 diving attacks, 0 failures. By March 18th, word was spreading like wildfire through 11 Group. Every squadron commander wanted Shilling's fix. Calls flooded Farnborough. Could she come? Could she bring more? How fast could production start? She had only her own 6 pieces, each turned by hand. To outfit fighter command, she'd need hundreds, thousands, and the Air Ministry's blessing. Against all peacetime logic, bureaucracy moved fast. 4 days later, approval landed, Rolls-Royce taking the contract to machine 500 a week. Shilling assembled a team, 3 engineers, 2 civilians, and hit the road on her Norden with panniers full of brass salvation. By the 25th of March, installations had begun across southern England. Biggin Hill, Hornchurch, Tangmere, all vital, all bloodied. At Biggin Hill, she met Group Captain Grace, a man who'd buried 7 pilots in 2 months. He ordered his ground crews to work round the clock. Each installation took 12 minutes flat. Break the line, slide in the washer, weld, test. She inspected every joint herself, rejecting those that failed her eye. Pilots gathered to watch, curiosity laced with superstition. Flight Lieutenant Lacey, a Cambridge engineer before the war, called it brilliant simplicity. Within 72 hours, every Merlin at Biggin Hill carried her handiwork. The same pattern repeated north and south, long shifts, quick flights, no failures. It worked. And as soldiers will, the men gave it a nickname, crude, irreverent, unforgettable. Miss Shilling's Orifice, they called it, a joke that rippled through mess halls and briefing rooms till even Rolls-Royce engineers used it without a blush. She didn't mind. She'd spent years in rooms where laughter was armor against fear. By April, pilots were demanding the Orifice by name, refusing to fly without it. Squadron leaders backed them. German intelligence soon noticed something different in the duels over the Channel. The British fighters no longer broke off when inverted, no longer stalled in the dive. Whatever weakness the Merlin once had was gone. By mid-April, 2,100 engines had been fitted. New aircraft left Castle Bromwich with the washer already in place. The official pressure carburetor was still on the drawing boards, but commanders began to wonder if they even need it. Why rebuild the whole system when a pennyweight of brass did the trick? Shilling knew better. Her washer was a stopgap, not a revolution. Yet it was the stopgap that kept the RAF breathing through its hardest months. Statistics told the tale. In March 41, before the fix, 38% of diving attacks ended in engine failure. In April, after installation, that figure dropped to less than 1%. Kill ratios tripled. The men's confidence soared. Robert Stanford Tuck out of Duxford, who'd suffered 4 engine cuts before, downed 5 109s in 2 months once his Spitfire